All right, so turn to, I was going to use Ezekiel. We're not going to do that right now. Turn to 1 Kings. And we're going to start in chapter 19. And while you're going there, I'm going to, okay, a lot of you were here last week. Somebody maybe wasn't, but, so last week we looked at 1 Kings 18. This week we're going to look at 1 Kings 19. The summary is that in 1 Kings 18, there had been a drought on Israel because Israel was following Ahab and his girlfriend Jezebel, right? And they were following Baal and Asherah and these other gods. So God sends this drought on them and for 3.5 years. And then he sends Elijah, and Elijah shows up and says, okay, why don't you get all your prophets of Baal and your prophets of Asherah, and we're going to have a little competition to see who God really is, right? And then God shows up, sends fire from heaven, burns up this offering, and then Elijah goes and kills 450 prophets of Baal. And then at the end of the chapter, Elijah goes up on Mount Carmel, and he watches. He tells his servant to keep watching until there is a cloud in the sky, it says as big as a man's hand, right? Elijah goes and tells Ahab, you better get going, because your chariot's going to get stuck in the mud here pretty soon. It's going to start raining 3.5 years. So Ahab goes toward Jezreel, that's where Jezebel is, and Elijah runs ahead of him. And I've always thought, well, why in the world would he run ahead of him, you know? And last week we talked a little bit about how chariots oftentimes had runners that went ahead. And still, I mean, why would he go there? And there's this, I hadn't thought of it before, but I started thinking, I wonder if Elijah within him has this hope that God has now displayed himself over 3.5 years. He kept his promise. You guys followed other gods, I'm going to shut the rain off. And through all the drought and famine, and then at the end, God puts this big exclamation point on it. Here's all these prophets that you followed instead, they're dead. And the one guy still standing, right, is Elijah. And so Elijah, he watches God make himself known to all of Israel, right? He sends Ahab back even to Jezebel. And I started thinking, I wonder if Elijah is running ahead because he's so excited about the fact that people have seen God work, and he's excited to see all of Israel turn back to God. He's excited to see Ahab turn back to God, and maybe even Jezebel, which, you know, we all know about Jezebel, and we know it didn't work out that way, but that's the end of chapter 18. Okay, so look at chapter 19. Okay? It says Ahab shows up, says Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he killed the prophets with the sword. And if you stop right there, you just have to wonder, how did Ahab tell Jezebel this? Was he excited? Was he discouraged? I don't know. And we just don't know. But Jezebel's reaction is not good. Verse 2 says, Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. So Ahab had gone in, went and talked to Jezebel. Elijah, of course, he's not allowed in there. Who knows exactly where he is, but she sends this messenger out to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me, and even more. Speaking of things don't end well for her, this is kind of a little self-fulfilling prophecy here. So may the gods do to me even more, if I do not make your life like one of them, being these other prophets, by tomorrow at this time. Now that, as near as I can tell, is not what Elijah was hoping for, right? Now I don't know if he was really excited about her turning her life around, or if he was excited about Ahab turning his life around, or if he was thinking, well, she's not going to turn around and Ahab's going to do her in, or I have no idea. But you can tell this isn't what he was hoping for, right? So she threatens to kill him. Verse 3, and he was, what does it say? He was afraid. This is where things start turning around with Elijah. Now, in chapter 18, you'll remember this guy, Obadiah, came across Elijah, And Elijah was already thinking he's the only guy, right? And Obadiah says, hey, I've been taking a stand for God and Israel's, or God's prophets right along. And I've taken a couple caves and I've stashed 50 guys in each. And I've kept alive 100 of God's prophets, right? But even at the end of that chapter, Elijah talks about being the only guy, right? And we discussed, like, he's not lying. Maybe he's the only guy speaking up. But I started feeling like, I think that something is sneaking up on Elijah that he's not paying attention to. It's not that he's lying. It's he really feels like he's the only guy, right? So look here in verse 3 where it says afraid. Some of you, there's a few versions, especially if you're a King James person, it doesn't say that. It says he saw what was going on, okay? Now, the next part where it says he arose and ran for his life tells you that he was afraid, okay? But the first part is that he saw everything that was going on, and then he ran away because he's afraid, okay? And what I'm saying here is I think there's more than just a fear. I think that there's discouragement. I think there's discouragement because the guy feels alone. But I think that the biggest thing at this point in his life is something that happens to all of us. His life is not going the way that he planned. Okay? It might be going the way God knew this was coming, right? And he's there, this prophet of God. And he's looking like, God, I just did all this stuff. You know, I watched you make yourself known. And I killed all these prophet guys. And then I ran all the way here in front of a dang chariot. Now I'm here. And Jezebel wants to kill me. And I just wonder if he isn't thinking like, God, I have served you. And now somebody wants to kill me. Now, if you just read 18, you should be thinking, why would he be afraid of anything? Right? Anything at all. You know what? I think he's just tired. I think he's starting to think to himself, I'm doing all this stuff for God, and nobody's changing. I'm trying to reach all these people and show them God. Nobody's changing. You can write this down in your notes if you want, if you're a note-taking person. 2 Corinthians 4, I think 4, is where it talks about the God of this world, Satan, right? And how he has blinded people. People who aren't following God. Satan's trying to blind them from the truth, okay? And I think that's what's happening all around Elijah. So he runs for his life, and he came to Beersheba. Now, that sounds like in the afternoon, doesn't it? Like he showed up, and he ran away for his life. No, this is 95 miles away. Beersheba's like 95 miles south. He's been running for a while, okay? He gets to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. And then he keeps going. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came and he sat down under a broom tree. Some of you probably says a juniper tree. Something like that. It's a smaller tree, probably 10 feet. People use it for shade. And when you read this, he sits himself down under this tree, right? And look what he says. Sits himself, and he requested for himself that he might die. And he says, it's enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers. There's a couple questions you should ask. Did he think that he was better than his fathers before? Did he look back at all the other prophets and think that he was better because of all these spectacular things? I think he just came to this realization. I'm not really doing so great. Like, everybody thought I was a big deal. Everything's so spectacular, right? And now I realize Israel's not turning around because of me. He just threw in the towel. Does that make sense? He runs. Believe me, if I ran 95 miles, I would want to die as well. But he gets all the way down here, 95 miles south of Carmel, plus a day's travel, right? He curls up under this tree. He's like, God, just take me home right now. I'm done with all this. It's just not working, right? It's not worth it. It's enough. So take my life. And I just want to... Is this where he's supposed to be? There's no way, right? God is calling him to all these places, but what's weird is this time he just ran. He just took off. And I honestly, when I look at it, I wonder if he didn't leave. Now, there's one guy that said, I wish I could remember his name right now. He said that Elijah left right when God needed him most, right? I'm thinking, God didn't need Elijah at all, right? He doesn't need any of us. But you know who did need Elijah? All those people in Jezreel still. You think about it, Jezebel should be the one on the run now, right? But he gets afraid and he runs away. And now Jezebel gets to say, oh, where's this big prophet of God now? He did all this stuff, but I threatened him, and he's gone, right? And I'm thinking, man, you should have stayed. There are still people who needed to hear who God was. People who still needed to hear what happened. And the only one telling the news is you, right? But he just took it. So, verse 5, verse 4, he thinks, man, I'm not any better. He's brought low. Verse 5, he lay down and he slept under the juniper tree. And behold, there was an angel touching him. And he said to him, arise and eat. And then he looked, and behold, at his head was bread cake. What kind of cake? Angel food cake. All right, baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and he drank, and what's he do? He lays down and goes back to sleep. When you guys are feeling like defeated and discouraged, what do you want to do? Sleep, right? Now, for a long time, I looked at it like, you slacker, just get up, right? I looked at it like, because me, I'm changing, but for a long time, I was the guy who people would say, man, I'm worn out. You know, you guys have heard about ministers talking about burnout. You know what I'm talking about? They're just fried and can't take it anymore. And I would, for the longest time, and I wish these words never would have come out of my mouth, but I'd be like, are you serious? Suck it up. The reason you're falling behind is because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Go, right? Like, there's no reason to ever, I will stop when I die, right? Well, guess what? That's what a young guy says. Now I'm like, I'm tired, you know? And there's two things. For a long time, I looked at him, like, so he gets it. Seriously, you just saw an angel. He baked you a cake. You ate, and you went back to sleep, right? I just thought, man, you need to wake up, right? But now I realize something different. I think that God knew Elijah and Elijah's heart, and he knew Elijah was fried. And he sends this guy, you know why? What do you do when you're depressed or discouraged? Do you go and rent a funny movie? No. You
isolate.
Yeah, you isolate yourself, right? What did he do? He runs, right? And then he drops off his sidekick, right? And then he goes off by himself and curls up under a tree, right? Think he stopped for lunch on the way? No. When you're depressed, well, there's two things. You either eat like pizzas and a box of ice cream by yourself, or you just stop eating, right? And he's a stop eating guy. And do you sleep well when you're all discouraged? No. And I think that God just was like, dude, there's a couple things you need. You need some food and you need to rest. That's what happened. And I just want you to know, if you're discouraged, if you're fried, if you're frustrated, if you're downcast, right? God is willing to wait for you. He wants to pick you up, okay? But he's going to take care of you right where you're at. That's what he does here. Verse 7. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. Now, you notice anything? What's he doing? Now God's waking him up. And he's feeding him, and he's saying, I've got something for you to do. You're going to take a journey. Look what happens. So he arose, and he ate, and he drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. It's probably Mount Sinai. It's a little hard to say for sure, but it's in that area. Horeb, the mountain of God. That's about 250 miles, is what most people guess. That's a long way. But is it a 40 days long way? Probably not. And so there's a few things I wonder about this. 40 days and nights is used a lot in Scripture, in different places. 40 days. Now, some of you, you're like, man, I was depressed, this weekend because, I don't know, my goldfish died or I got a bad grade. It doesn't seem to stick that long. My first year of ministry, there was this guy, John Sowashi. He said, how you doing? I was like, man, maybe it was my second one. I was like, it's horrible. I am doing bad. I am dragging. I don't feel good. He's like, how long's it been? I was like, it's been weeks. He's like, call me when it's been years. And I was like, what are you talking about, right? Well, here's the deal is it takes time for you to recover. And I don't know if God had him wandering around. I don't know if he just is walking slow. I don't know. But I wonder a little if God just didn't give him time. Does that make sense to you? Number one. Number two, I also wonder if, look what it says. It says he went, he arose, he ate, he drank, and he went in, what does it say? The strength of that food. Now that doesn't prove that he couldn't have had more, but I wonder if this wasn't a time of fasting and just spending time with just him and God for 40 days. Okay? Then he came to verse 9. What's yours say? Cave? NAS says a cave. ESV? That's the same as mine. Okay, so a cave. Most of them say a cave. He came to a cave. And he lodged there, and behold, it says, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, look what he says, what are you doing? It's like, what are you doing here, Elijah? And I think, well, the angel said the journey is a long way. I just hooked it 250 miles. I showed up here in this spot, right? You're thinking he's probably guided by God, right? He shows up in this spot, and then when God speaks, what does he say? What are you doing here, man? Like, what? It sounds to me like, what is your problem? Right? I don't know. But he says, what are you doing here? And I love verse 10. Because he just says it, right? As if, I'm sure he's prayed about this right along. I'm sure he's been telling God for a long time. But this, he finally gets his chance. I have been zealous for the Lord. Does anybody say jealous? Different versions. It says jealous. Which is weird. But you need to get what a godly jealousy is if you haven't got this. You're not supposed to be jealous. You're not supposed to be jealous of other people. You're not supposed to be jealous of other people's stuff. Right? We're not supposed to be jealous people. When God talks about being jealous, right, he says he's jealous for you. But that's the way a husband is jealous for his wife. Does that make sense? And that's not a bad thing. I'll tell you what, you steal my car? Yeah. You steal something else from me? Yeah. You mess with my wife? I have a bad day. Right? That is how God is for you. And that's zealous, passionate. Right? And that is what Elijah is saying. He says, God, I've been passionate for you. Right? I've been jealous for you. All I've wanted is you, and I've served you. That's what he says, that's big words when you're talking to God, right? He says, I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've killed your prophets with the sword. And what's he say? And I alone am left. Now, remember Obadiah from 18? That guy's left, right? And remember the 100 people or the 100 prophets specifically that he kept safe and fed and stuff? So that's at least 100 prophets and another guy, right? But how does Elijah feel? I'm the only guy. You ever feel that way? See, again, what do? When you feel alone, you go off by yourself, don't you? When you're alone, you leave your friends. He left his sidekick behind, right? When you feel down and when you feel lonely, you separate and you listen to country music. It's horrible. What are we doing to ourselves? I worked in this garage for a long time, and there's this guy. He would come to work every day. His name was Neil for a period of time, and I was like, man, what is going on with him? Well, his wife left him. He lost his house. He lived in a motel, a serious motel, not hotel, motel, right? And not nice. And every day he'd come in and he'd be smoking a cigarette and he'd have a chew. if you're smoking and chewing, things aren't going well. And drinking his coffee, he wouldn't talk, and he'd play country music all day. It was making me depressed, you know? This is where this guy's at. I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So, look what God says in 11. Go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Now, there's another spot I want you to write down. It's Exodus 33, and I think it starts in verse 18. There's this cool spot where Moses says, God, show me what, just make yourself known. Read it. I'm giving you the abbreviated version. And God's like, oh, I'll show myself to you, but if you see my face, you will die, right? And you can write down Ezekiel. Ezekiel's is, actually, we should look at Ezekiel's. We'll do that in a second. But what happens is, he puts Moses in the cleft of a rock, like in this little crack in this rock, and then it says God puts his hand over and goes by. So Moses doesn't see anything but what God lets him see. Does that make sense? Okay, keep your finger here, and I'm going to show you something in Ezekiel. It's really cool. When you think about, I think I mentioned this last week, when we talk about being in the presence of God, like we're so excited about it and all this, Ezekiel chapter 1, right at the end, God shows up, and Ezekiel freaks out. Look what it says. This is 28. As the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. And then this last sentence is really good. Such was the appearance, okay, count these up. Such was the appearance, 1, of the likeness, 2, of the glory of the Lord. He didn't see God. He didn't see the glory of God, right? He didn't see the likeness of the glory of God. No, he saw the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. And when I saw it, I fell on my face. He just freaked, right? Okay, look what happens here to Elijah. God says, go forth, verse 11, stand on the mountain before the Lord, and behold, the Lord was passing by, and a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. So it's like, God's going to come by, right? And here comes it now. I don't know how windy it has to be to start breaking the rocks apart, but I don't want to be standing there when it's happening, right? He goes out, and here comes God, right? And the wind is so insane that it's ripping the mountain apart. It's rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But what does it say? But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. Now, if the rocks are breaking already, I'm thinking that's earthquake. So heaven only knows what this earthquake was like, right? But another place I don't want to be during an earthquake is in a cave, right? Doesn't sound good. There was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire. Now, you remember the fire from chapter 18. There's this fire that comes down, and it says that it licks up the water, the sand, and all the stones and the wood and the sacrifice. Man, if there's fire coming that is melting rock, that's just crazy, right? But the Lord, verse 12, was not in the fire. Look what it says here. And after the fire, what does it say? Sound of what? Gentle blowing.
Mine says a gentle whisper.
A gentle whisper? Yours says
a low whisper.
A low whisper. I think there's a version, it's stuck in my head, but I can't find it, that says a silent whisper, which you can't hear. And it also should be the name of an 80s band. So what happens? Elijah sees what? The wind that's tearing stuff apart, right? He sees this earthquake and all this display of power. He sees fire from the sky. Now, there are people who talk about this is God displaying his power over the elements, which you saw in 18. That's all the other gods, small g, that these people worship. I don't think that's why God did this. I don't think so at all. You know why? Because Elijah doesn't worship these gods. He's already seen the stuff, and he doesn't need God to prove that to him. Does that make sense? He does display his power, and I think that's a big deal. Why do you think God does this? This is what I think. I think he's saying, Elijah, what are you looking for? Are you looking for flashy? Or are you looking for all this earth-shattering stuff? Or are you looking for all these signs? Or do you want to have a relationship with me? Are you really looking to hear from me? Or are you looking to do more flashy stuff? Because I want to see stuff. And that's not cool. What I'm asking is, do you want to see the stuff God does? Or do you want to know God? You can find flashy stuff everywhere, right? And I think you will see the power of God. But what's my priority? I want to hear from God. I want to have a relationship with God. So what's God saying? There's this sound of a gentle blowing. 13, it came about when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle. He wraps his face. Why do you think he did that? I think same as Ezekiel, and I think same as Moses in Exodus 33. I think he's keeping himself covered in the presence of God. And he went out and he stood in the entrance of the cave, and behold, a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here?" Isn't that great? Like, what are you doing? And so Elijah responds the same way, like as if God didn't hear him before. I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and what's he say? I alone am left. And they seek my life to take it away. And God says, go return your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you've arrived, you're going to anoint King Hazael, king over Aram. Jehu, the son of Nimshi, which actually that's Nimshi's grandson, which is a little weird. But that's the same way that Israel said things like son of David, even though you were a little ways down the line, okay? You're going to anoint him king over Israel. And look at this next part. This is really cool. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel, things I can't pronounce, and you will anoint him as prophet in your place. You know what's really weird? There's not a lot of spots. There's spots talking about anointing kings. There's not a lot of talking about anointing prophets of God. And there's not a whole lot about one passing it on to the next one. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird gig. And it shall come about, the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu, shall put to death. And the one who escapes from Jehu, Elisha, shall put to death. Look at verse 18. What's God say? Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that hasn't kissed him. So what just happened? He just said, dude, you know why you're alone? Because your sorry butt is out here instead of where it's supposed to be. Because you're alone because you separated yourself. You came running out here. And I've been patient with you, and I've been kind to you, and I'm talking to you. I love you, but you need to get up and go. Because there's not just the 100 that your buddy kept safe that you forgot all about, but I've got 7,000 of my people that haven't bowed to Baal, that haven't kissed him, right? You're not by yourself. The only reason you're by yourself is because you put yourself here, right? God does a few things. Remember earlier, I really think that God said, I'm going to give you food, right? And I'm going to give you rest. I'm going to bring you into my presence. I'm going to spend time with you 40 days. Your whiny butt's going to show up in this cave. I'm going to talk to you, right? And what are you still saying? I asked you more than once, right? What are you still saying? I'm all by myself. You're in the presence of God, for goodness sake, right? And I got 7,000 others. But what does he do? He gave them food and rest before. Now what does he give them? A mission. He gives them a mission. You go anoint these guys. But I think the biggest part is he says, you know what? You're going to anoint Elisha, who's going to follow you. And your biggest mission right now is to train Elisha to take your place. You know why? Elijah, what I am doing is bigger than you. It's bigger than you location-wise. It's bigger than you anything you can reach. It's bigger than you through time, and there has to be somebody after you. And the most important thing you're going to do is not all this flashy stuff, and it's not the fire from heaven, and it's not those sacrifices. It's teaching another person how to walk in my presence. How to walk. You take somebody, you put them next to you, and then you walk with me so that they know how to walk with me. Does that make sense to you? And he does. He goes, and we don't have time to go into what he does with Elijah, but are you going to talk about Elijah next week? Okay, so we're not going to talk about that. No spoilers. So this is what I want you to take with you. Okay? For the longest time, I just thought, look, now, these days, if I say the word depression, right? Nobody wants to say, like, you get clinical stuff in your head, right? You don't want to say that you struggle with it, but you do. We all do. We get tired. We get worn out. And life doesn't go the way we planned, right? Man, you talk to, you finally get guts enough to step up and talk to somebody about Jesus, and they don't follow. That's discouraging. Does that make sense? You share your passion, and it's not somebody else's passion, right? We all get frustrated. We all get discouraged. But what I'm telling you is that God's work is bigger than you. Our job is to do what God asks us right now. To take these steps, to do these things, to live this way. And our biggest job is to simply walk with Him. Walk with Him when we're feeling low. Walk with Him when we're doing well. I was going to bring you a Screwtape Letters quote, but I'm not going to. The short version is, I think it's chapter 18, actually. I might be wrong. But C.S. Lewis talks about this. He says that our valleys, and you guys have all heard this, you got mountains and valleys. You know, you come back from a retreat or a mission trip, you're feeling good, and then things kind of tank. I think that a dry spell might be a better way to describe this. C.S. Lewis talks about it as a valley. You know what he says? That is the time we should look for. That is the time when God's really changing us, working on us. And that's the time that God changed Elijah in his heart. Does that make sense? When you're struggling, pursue God all the more. Okay? And I think that God can change you. I think that God can do huge things in you. But I think that you should expect it. That's my notes. They're written on the back of the receipt from Lowe's or something. Pay no attention to that. You're not supposed to see that. Yes. So this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. When you're depressed, I'm just going to say it. What do? Don't separate yourself. Just don't. Right? You pursue others. God provided rest, food, and a mission for Elijah. Did you notice the last thing that he gave? He gave it to Elisha. It wasn't just his mission. You know what's awesome? Is Elisha walked by him and encouraged him and challenged him and lifted him up. We were not meant to be by ourselves. Does that make sense? You need friends. Really what you need is family, right? And I'm not talking your original family necessarily. I'm talking this family. Listen, if you're a Christian, if you've been baptized into Christ, if you've been cleansed by His sacrifice, then you are related to me by blood. Right? And we should live like family.